I just found out that for the last 11 years, I have been wearing an engagement ring that was actually meant for my dead fiancé's mistress. His mother is demanding I return it immediately so she can give it to the woman he was sleeping with while we were planning our wedding. My name is Amelia, and I am currently living a nightmare where my grief was just a joke to the wealthy Holloway family. They watched me mourn at his grave for a decade while they hid his secret son. And now, they are gaslighting me into believing I am the villain for keeping a ring I paid for with my own life savings. My boyfriend has abandoned me. My car has been vandalized with the word thief, and the entire city is looking at me like I am a monster. How does a person recover when they realize their entire adult life was built on a foundation of lies? Is it wrong to want revenge on a ghost? I feel like I am losing my mind. Every time I look at my hand, I see a shackle instead of a promise. Please, I need someone to tell me I am not crazy for wanting to smash this heirloom into 1,000 pieces. What would you do if you were me? My name is Amelia Vance. I am 36 years old, and I spend my days bringing the dead back to life. That is not my official job title. Of course, on my tax forms, I am listed as an archival restoration specialist working out of a quiet, climate-controlled studio in the Queen Anne district of Seattle. I take photographs that have been ravaged by flood, fire, or simple neglect, and I painstakingly piece them back together. I fill in the cracks. I smooth over the tears. I make history look perfect, even when the reality was anything but. It is a fitting profession for someone who has spent the last 11 years curating a museum for a ghost. Rain was lashing against the bay windows of my apartment, a rhythmic drumming that usually soothed me. The gray light of the Pacific Northwest afternoon filtered onto my workbench, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I adjusted my magnifying lamp, focusing on the edges of a tin-type photograph from the 19th century, but my eyes drifted, as they always did, to my left hand. The diamond solitaire on my ring finger was not ostentatious. It was a round cut, set in white gold, classic and unassuming. To a stranger, it was just a piece of jewelry. To me, it was a gravestone I carried everywhere I went. I rubbed my thumb over the setting, a nervous tic I had developed over a decade ago. The metal was warm against my skin, but the memory it held was cold. Leo, my Leo, he had died 11 years ago, his car skidding on black ice, just 3 days before our wedding. I had survived the crash of his loss, but I was not sure I had ever really walked away from the wreckage. The sound of the front door opening pulled me from my trance. "Hey, Amy," a voice called out, followed by the sound of wet boots being kicked off on the hardwood floor. "I picked up dinner, that Thai place you like. Sao Jing Hao Ling. Deva? David." I took a breath, composing my face into a mask of welcoming normalcy before swiveling my chair around. David stood in the doorway, shaking raindrops from his hair. He was 42, solid, dependable, and very much alive. He was everything Leo was not anymore. Leo was frozen in time, eternally 25 and perfect. David had gray hairs at his temples and groaned when he stood up too fast. David was real. And sometimes I hated myself for how much I resented his reality. "Smells great," I lead, forcing a smile. I was not hungry. I had not been hungry in years. It felt like I just ate to keep the machine running. David walked over and kissed the top of my head. He glanced at the photograph on my desk, then at my hand. His eyes lingered on the ring for a fraction of a second too long. He never said anything about it explicitly, He was too patient, too understanding. He knew he was sharing this apartment and this relationship with a third person who was not there. I was thinking, David said, unpacking the takeout containers on the kitchen island. Since my lease is up next month, maybe we should talk about the garage. If I move my tools in there, I could fix up that old shelving unit for you. My stomach tightened, moving in properly, combining lives. It was the logical next step. We had been dating for 2 years, but every time he mentioned it, I felt a wave of nausea. It felt like infidelity. How could I let David move his toolbox into the space where Leo used to tune his guitar? That sounds practical. I managed to say, turning back to my work to hide the panic in my eyes. Let me just finish this batch of mail before we eat. I walked over to the small table in the hallway where the mail had piled up. Most of it was junk. Flyers for roof repairs, coupons for pizza, the usual suburban debris. I sifted through them mindlessly until my fingers brushed against something different. It was an envelope made of heavy, cream-colored cardstock. It felt expensive. There was no return address sticker, just elegant, cursive handwriting in black ink. Miss Amelia Vance. My heart skipped a beat. I knew that handwriting. It was sharp, angular, and precise. It was the handwriting of a woman who never made mistakes, or at least, never admitted to them. I brought the envelope to my nose. It smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. A chill that had nothing to do with the Seattle rain shot down my spine. I had not seen or heard from the owner of that handwriting in 11 years. Not since the funeral. Not since she had looked at me across the open casket with eyes that were dry and hard as flint. David, sensing my stillness, walked up behind me. What is it? A bill? No, I whispered, my voice trembling. I tore open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of matching stationery. The header was embossed. The Halloway Estate. I read the words, and the air left the room. My dearest Amelia, time is a cruel thief. Is it not? It has been 11 years since we lost our beloved Leo. I have tried to respect your space, as I know you needed to heal. However, the dead do not always rest easy. Leo has come to me. He is in distress. There are matters regarding his soul and his possessions that we must discuss. I will be in the city this Thursday. Come to tea. We have much to rectify. Xiao Ting Haling. 2# is greater than sincerely. Margaret Halloway. I lowered the letter, my hand shaking so violently the paper rattled. She did not ask how I was. She did not ask if I was free. She commanded, "Who is Margaret Halloway?" David asked, reading over my shoulder. I looked at the ring on my finger. The diamond seemed to catch the light differently now, looking less like a star and more like a watching eye. She is Leo's mother, I said, my voice sounding hollow, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. David frowned. The one who cut you off? Why is she writing to you now? I read the line again. The dead do not always rest easy. Margaret Halloway was a woman of old money and ancient grudges. She did not believe in coincidences, and she certainly did not believe in friendly reunions. If she was reaching out after a decade of silence, it was not because she missed me. It was because she wanted something. I felt a sudden, irrational urge to hide my hand behind my back. I do not know, I said, though deep down, in the darkest, a most cynical corner of my mind, I knew exactly what this was. This was not an invitation. It was a summons. The peace I had carefully constructed, the quiet life of restoration and silence I had built with David, suddenly felt very fragile. It was like one of the brittle photographs on my desk, One touch, one wrong move, and it would crumble into dust. I have to go, I told David, clutching the letter to my chest. Why? He asked, his voice laced with concern and a hint of frustration. Amy, she has not spoken to you in a decade. Because, I said, looking him in the eye, finally admitting the truth I had been running from. She is the only other person in the world who loved him as much as I did. And if she says he is in distress, I cannot ignore it. I did not tell David the other part, the part that whispered in my ear that I was a fraud, that I was playing house with him while my real husband lay in the cold ground. If Margaret was coming back, it was because punishment was due, and I had been waiting for my punishment for 11 years. The tea room was called the Emerald Salon, a place where silence cost $20 a cup and the air smelled of stale orchids and old money. It was the kind of place where people whispered not out of politeness, but because they had secrets to keep. I arrived 10 minutes early, my umbrella dripping onto the marble foyer, feeling like an intruder in a world I had abandoned 11 years ago. I chose a table in the corner, far away from the windows. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that made my hands shake. I clasped them together on the white tablecloth, hiding the tremor, hiding the ring. When Margaret Halloway walked in, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. She looked smaller than I remembered. The imposing matriarch, who had once organized charity galas with the ruthlessness of a general, had shrunk. Her spine was still steel straight, but her skin was translucent, like parchment paper stretched too thin over bone. She wore a black coat, immaculate and severe, as if she were still in mourning. Perhaps she was Amelia, she said. Her voice was not a greeting. It was an assessment. Margaret, I replied, half rising from my chair. I did not know if I should hug her. My instincts told me to reach out, to comfort the mother of the man I had loved. But something in her eyes stopped me. They were gray, sharp, and utterly devoid of warmth. Sit, she commanded softly, taking the seat opposite me. A waiter appeared instantly, pouring tea from a silver pot. Margaret watched the liquid fill her cup, her gaze intense, as if she were reading the future in the rising steam. You look different, she said finally. Her eyes flicked over my face, noting the lines around my eyes, the lack of expensive makeup. You look like you have moved on. The words were spoken gently, but they landed like a slap. I have tried to survive. Margaret, I said, my voice tight. It has been 11 years. 11 years, she repeated, testing the weight of the phrase. For you? Perhaps. For a mother, time does not move. It circles. She reached across the table. Her hand was ice cold as she covered mine. I flinched, but I did not pull away. I felt the pressure of her palm on my knuckles, pressing the diamond of my engagement ring into my skin. It hurt. I asked you here because I have not been sleeping. Amelia, she whispered, leaning in closer. The facade of the strong aristocrat cracked, revealing a desperate, haunted woman beneath. Or at least, that is what she wanted me to see. Why? I asked. Are you ill? Not me, she said, her voice dropping to a hiss. Him, Leo. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at her, paralyzed. He comes to me in the night, she continued, her eyes widening. Manic and wet, he stands at the foot of my bed. He is cold, Amelia, so terribly cold. He tells me he cannot cross over. He is tethered here. He is in pain. My rational mind, the part of me that repaired logical historical timelines for a living. Wanted to scream that this was grief, that this was a hallucination, but my heart, the part of me that still talked to Leo's photo when no one was watching, shattered. Why? I choked out. Because of the anchor, Margaret said. Her gaze dropped to my left hand. She slowly pulled her hand away, exposing the ring. It was a simple band with a diamond that Leo and I had picked out at a small antique store in downtown Seattle. It was not an heirloom. It was not famous. But to Margaret, it was looking at a murder weapon. That ring, she said, pointing a trembling finger at it. It contains a piece of his soul. He poured his hopes, his future, his very essence into that metal when he bought it for you. And now it is being defiled. Defiled? I whispered, pulling my hand back as if she had burned me. I know there is a man. Amelia, she said, her voice sharpening. I know you are living with someone. I know you let him touch you with those same hands. I know you let him lie in the bed where you wear that ring. She made it sound dirty. She made my relationship with David, a relationship built on kindness and patience, sound like adultery every time that man warms you. Margaret said, a tear finally escaping her eye, tracking through the powder on her cheek. You burn, Leo. You are trapping him between this world and the next, holding him hostage with a symbol that no longer belongs to you. The guilt was instantaneous and overwhelming. It washed over me like a tidal wave of black water. I looked at the ring. Suddenly, it did not look like a promise anymore. It looked like a shackle. What do you want me to do? I asked, my voice barely audible above the clinking of china from the next table. Give it to me, she said. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by a steely resolve. I must take it to the family crypt. I will have the priest perform a cleansing ritual, and then we will bury it with him. It is the only way to sever the tie. It is the only way to set my son free. My hand curled into a fist instinctively. This ring was all I had left. It was the only physical proof that Leo had chosen me, that I had been loved by someone so wonderful. Giving it up felt like erasing the only beautiful thing I had ever owned. Margaret, I said, my voice trembling but stubborn. We bought this together. I paid for more than half of it with my savings. It is mine. It is my memory of him. Margaret sat back, her expression hardening into disappointed disdain. She looked at me, not as a grieving fiancé, but as a petulant child refusing to share a toy. So, it is about the money? She asked, her tone dripping with venom. You keep my son in purgatory because you are attached to a piece of carbon? I thought you loved him. Amelia, I thought you were the one person who would sacrifice anything for him. I did love him, I cried out, a little too loud. A few heads turned in our direction. I lowered my voice, tears stinging my eyes. I still love him. Then prove it, she hissed. Do the right thing. Stop thinking about your own sentimental vanity and think about his soul. Or are you truly that selfish? Have you really replaced him so easily that you do not care if he suffers? I looked down at the table, the white cloth blurred. Was I selfish? Was I hurting Leo by trying to be happy with David? The seed of doubt, planted deep in the fertile soil of my survivor guilt, began to sprout. I need time to think, I stammered. Margaret stood up. She did not finish her tea. She did not offer to pay. She simply adjusted her coat, looking down at me with the supreme confidence of a woman who knew she had already won the war, even if she had lost this specific battle. Do not take too long. Amelia, she said coldly, every night you wait, is another night, he screams in the dark. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the floorboards like the ticking of a clock counting down to my destruction. I was left alone in the elegant room, clutching my left hand, feeling the metal band constrict around my finger. It felt heavier now. It felt like it was dragging me down into the earth, down to where Leo was waiting, cold and angry. The nights were the hardest. Before my meeting with Margaret, the dark had been a time for rest. Now, it was a theater for my own guilt. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, and the silence of the apartment was deafening. Beside me, David breathed in a slow, rhythmic cadence, his chest rising and falling with the peaceful ignorance of the living. I envied him. I envied his ability to close his eyes and simply drift away. I lay rigid on my back, staring at the shadows dancing on the ceiling. Margaret's words were on a loop in my mind, replaying with the clarity of a high-definition recording. Every night you wait is another night, he screams in the dark. Was he screaming right now? I turned my head slowly to look at the nightstand. I had taken the ring off before bed, placing it in a small ceramic dish. In the faint moonlight filtering through the blinds, the diamond glinted. It looked cold. It looked accusing. I felt a phantom weight on my finger, a ghostly constriction where the metal band should be. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and touched the cold gold. It felt like touching a frozen hand. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to summon Leo's face. I wanted to see a smile, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, but all I could see was Margaret's face, twisted in grief, telling me I was torturing her son. The next morning brought no relief, only a gray, drizzle-soaked Seattle dawn and a phone call that would shatter the last of my defenses. I was in the kitchen, staring blankly at the coffee maker as it gurgled and hissed. When my cell phone buzzed against the countertop, the screen lit up with the word, Mom. A wave of relief washed over me. My mother was a simple woman, kind and conflict avoidant to a fault. She lived 2 states away in a small town where everyone knew everyone, and problems were solved with casseroles and prayer circles. I needed her voice. I needed her to tell me that I was being ridiculous, that Margaret was a crazy old woman, and that I should keep my ring. Hey, Mom, I said, cradling the phone between my shoulder and ear as I poured a cup of coffee. Amelia, honey. Her voice came through, soft and hesitant. There was a tone in her greeting that made my stomach drop. It was the tone she used when someone had died, or when she had to deliver bad news. Is everything okay? I asked, setting the coffee pot down. Is Dad all right? Oh, yes, Dad is fine, she said quickly. Too quickly. It is just, well, I had a very long talk with Mrs. Holloway yesterday. My blood ran cold. Margaret, she had not just stopped at me. She had gone behind my back, reaching out to my parents, crossing state lines to spread her poison. She called you? I asked, my grip tightening on the mug until my knuckles turned white. Why? She is very distraught. Amelia, my mother said, her voice dropping to a whisper. She told me about the dreams, about Leo not being at rest. Honey, it sounded just awful. She was crying on the phone for nearly an hour. I felt a surge of betrayal. Mom, she is manipulating you. She is trying to guilt-trip me into giving her the engagement ring. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence that was heavy with judgment. Well, maybe you should, my mother said softly. I nearly dropped my mug. What? Amelia, listen to me, she continued, her voice pleading. You have been holding on to that grief for 11 years. Maybe it is time to let go. And if that ring is causing a mother so much pain, is it really worth keeping? You know what they say about holding on to things that belong to the dead. It is bad luck. It prevents you from moving forward. It is not just a thing. Mom, I argued, my voice rising. It is mine. Leo gave it to me. I paid for most of it. Money is not everything. Amelia, she chastised gently, do not be greedy. Peace of mind is worth more than a diamond. Think about your karma. Do you really want to start a new life with David while holding on to a cursed object? Mrs. Halloway said she would pay for a beautiful ceremony to put Leo to rest. Is that not what you want? For Leo to be at peace? I felt like the walls were closing in. My own mother, the person who was supposed to be on my side, was parroting Margaret's words. Greedy, cursed, peace. Margaret had weaponized my mother's superstitions and kindness against me. I have to go, I whispered, unable to listen to another word. Think about it, honey. Just give it back. Be the bigger person. I hung up the phone and sank onto the kitchen floor. I pulled my knees to my chest. I was completely alone. My family, my history, everyone seemed to agree that I was the villain in this story. I was the selfish woman hoarding a piece of metal while a ghost suffered. That evening, the atmosphere in the apartment was thick with tension. David tried to be normal. He made dinner. He asked about my work. I answered in monosyllables, my mind a chaotic storm of guilt and resentment. Later, in the bedroom, David tried to bridge the distance between us. He turned off the lamp and pulled me close. His skin was warm, his touch gentle. He kissed my neck, his hands moving over my shoulders. For a moment, I wanted to lose myself in him. I wanted to forget Margaret, the ring, and the screaming ghost. But as his hand slid down my arm and interlaced with my fingers, Eve froze. He pulled back, turning on the bedside lamp. The sudden light was blinding. He looked at my left hand. Where is it? He asked. His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. I looked down. My ring finger was bare. A pale band of white skin marked the spot where the ring had sat for 4,000 days. I had taken it off and hidden it in the drawer before coming to bed. I just took it off to put on lotion. I lied. It was a clumsy, stupid lie. I never took it off for lotion. David sat up, running a hand through his hair. He looked exhausted. Do not lie to me. Amy, you took it off because of her, did you not? Because of what that woman said to you. I sat up too, pulling the sheet around me defensively. It is not because of her. I do not want to be disrespectful. Disrespectful to who? David asked, his voice rising in frustration. To me? Or to a man who has been gone for over a decade? To Leo, I snapped. And yes, to Margaret. She is his mother. David, she is suffering. She thinks I am hurting him by wearing it while I am with you. And maybe she is right. Maybe it is wrong. David looked at me with an expression of utter disbelief. Amy, listen to yourself. You are not hurting a ghost. You are hurting yourself, and you are hurting us. This woman is manipulating you. She is gaslighting you into thinking your happiness is a sin. Can you not see that? She is not manipulating me, I yelled, the defense flying out of my mouth before I could stop it. I was defending my abuser. I was defending the woman who had called me a thief, because admitting she was evil meant admitting I was a fool for listening to her. She is a grieving mother who lost her only child. You do not understand that kind of pain. You do not have the right to judge her." David recoiled as if I had slapped him. He looked at me for a silent moment. The hurt in his eyes was palpable. "I am not judging her grief, Amy," he said quietly. "I am judging her cruelty, and I am terrified because it is working. You are disappearing. The woman I love is disappearing, and she is being replaced by this guilt-ridden shadow who takes off her jewelry so she will not offend a corpse." He got out of bed. He did not yell. He did not slam the door. He simply grabbed his pillow and a blanket from the closet. "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I am going to sleep on the couch," David said, not looking back, "because there are already 3 people in this bed. Amy, and I am the only one who does not belong here." The door clicked shut behind him. I was left alone in the king-sized bed. I reached into the nightstand drawer and fumbled in the dark until my fingers found the cold, hard metal of the ring. I clutched it in my palm, squeezing it until the edges dug into my flesh. I wanted to throw it across the room. I wanted to put it back on. I did neither. I just lay there in the dark, clutching my burden, listening to the silence of the empty apartment, wondering if Margaret was right. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was the one who destroyed everything I touched. The archives had always been my fortress. It was a subterranean world of temperature-controlled rooms and the comforting, musty scent of decaying cellulose. Here, amidst the silent rows of metal shelving, the chaos of the living world could not touch me. The dead did not judge. They only waited to be remembered. But that morning, as I swiped my keycard and pushed open the heavy steel doors, I realized that my fortress had been breached. I was 20 minutes late. I had spent too long in the shower, trying to scrub away the feeling of failure that had coated my skin since David had walked out of the bedroom the night before. My eyes were puffy, and no amount of concealer could hide the dark circles that looked like bruises under the fluorescent lights. As I walked down the main corridor toward my office, I heard voices. One was the deep, rumbling baritone of Mr. Henderson, the museum director. The other was soft, melodic, and terrifyingly familiar. I froze. My hand gripped the strap of my bag until my fingers ached. Standing in the center of the open-plan restoration area, surrounded by 3 of my colleagues, was Margaret Halloway. She looked immaculate. She wore a charcoal wool coat and a silk scarf tied effortlessly around her neck. She was holding a small box of pastries from the most expensive bakery in the city. To anyone else, she looked like a benevolent grandmother stopping by for a visit. To me, she looked like a shark circling in shallow water. "Amelia," Margaret exclaimed as soon as she saw me. Her face lit up with a performance of warmth that made my stomach turn. "I hope you do not mind. I was in the neighborhood meeting with the Historical Society, and I just had to see where you perform your miracles." Mr. Henderson beamed. He was a man who respected donors and old money, and Margaret Halloway reeked of both. "Amelia, Mrs. Halloway was just telling us about the fascinating history of your connection. I had no idea you were so close to the Halloway family." I walked forward, my legs feeling like lead. "Why are you here, Margaret?" I asked. My voice was too sharp, too defensive for the polite atmosphere of the office. My colleague, Linda, frowned slightly. Linda was the office gossip, a woman who thrived on other people's drama. She looked from me to Margaret, sensing blood in the water. "Oh, dear," Margaret said, her smile faltering just enough to look wounded. "I did not mean to intrude. I just wanted to bring you a treat. I know how hard you work. And, well, I suppose I just wanted to feel close to him today. She did not say Leo's name, but she did not have to. The air in the room thickened. She turned to Mr. Henderson, her voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper that was perfectly calibrated to be heard by everyone. You know, looking at all these beautiful artifacts, it reminds me of our family treasure. The ring Amelia wears. It has been in the Holloway spirit for generations. In a way, it is tragic. Really, my poor boy cannot rest without it. And yet, well, possessions are complicated things. She let the sentence hang there, unfinished, pregnant with accusation. All eyes shifted to my left hand. I had put the ring back on that morning. It felt heavy, a beacon drawing every gaze in the room. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. An heirloom? I thought, well, never mind. It is a lovely piece. It is not an heirloom, I said, my voice rising. We bought it at an antique shop on First Avenue. Margaret Seahill. A long, tragic sound. Of course, dear. Legally, you are correct. It was a purchase. But spiritually, when a man buys a ring with the intent of binding his soul to yours, does it not become something more than just a receipt? It belongs to the family history now. It belongs to his memory. She looked at Linda, then back to me, her eyes glistening. I only want to honor him. Amelia, I only want to bring him peace. I would think, after all these years, you would want that too. But I understand. It is a valuable diamond. It is hard to let go of assets. The word hung in the air. Assets. She had just painted me as a gold digger without ever using the term. She had turned my sentimental attachment into greed. It is not about the value, I stammered, but I sounded guilty even to my own ears. Margaret reached out and patted my arm. It is okay. Amelia, we all grieve in our own ways. Some of us pray, some of us keep things. She stayed for another 10 minutes, charming everyone, leaving a trail of poison wrapped in sugar. When she finally left, the silence in the office was suffocating. I went to my desk and sat down, my hands trembling. Linda walked by a moment later holding a file. You know, she said, not looking at me, my grandmother lost her wedding ring once. She said it felt like bad luck for the whole family until she found it. If his mom thinks it is haunting him, that is heavy stuff. Amy, I did not answer. I could not. At lunch, I stayed at my desk, too afraid to go to the break room. I pulled out my phone to text David, desperate to bridge the gap between us, to tell him he was right and that I was scared. But before I could type a message, a notification from the Queen Anne Community Connect app popped up on my screen. It was a popular neighborhood forum where locals complained about parking and lost cats. But the top post, trending with over 50 comments, made my blood freeze. The post was anonymous, titled, "Heartbroken Mother in Our Community Needs Help." I clicked it, my breath hitching in my throat. I saw a tragedy today. A wonderful, elderly woman from one of our city's oldest families is begging for the return of a ring to bury with her son who died tragically years ago. The ex-fiancé, who has moved on and is living with another man, refuses to give it back. She claims she loves him, but she will not let his soul rest because she wants to keep the jewelry. Shame on those who value diamonds over dignity. How can someone be so heartless? I scrolled down to the comments. User Seattle Mom 44. That is disgusting. If she has a new boyfriend, why does she need the old ring? Sell it and give the money to charity if she is so desperate. User Old Soul. This is why the younger generation is lost. No respect for the dead. Give the mother her peace. User Neighbor Jim. I think I know who this is. Does she work at the archives? The room spun. I dropped the phone on my desk as if it were burning hot. She was everywhere. Margaret was not just coming for the ring. She was coming for my life. She was dismantling my reputation, my safe spaces, and my sanity. Brick by brick, I looked around the office. Mr. Henderson was in his glass-walled office, looking at me. When our eyes met, he quickly looked away. The paranoia set in instantly. Did they know? Had they seen the post? Were they whispering about me right now? Wondering if I was the heartless witch who chose a diamond over a grieving mother's wish. I felt a sudden, violent urge to scream, to stand up and shout that I was the victim here. But I knew how that would look. It would look like hysteria. It would look exactly like the unstable, selfish woman Margaret was painting me to be. I grabbed my purse. I could not breathe in there anymore. I walked out of the office, past Linda, past Mr. Henderson, and out into the rain. I did not know where I was going. I just knew that the walls were closing in. And for the first time in 11 years, I felt like I had absolutely nowhere to hide. The morning air was thick with mist, the kind that clings to your skin and refuses to let go. I had not slept. The silence in the apartment was absolute. David had slept on the couch, and when I walked into the living room, the blankets were folded with military precision. He was already dressed, drinking coffee by the window, staring out at the gray street below. We did not speak. The air between us was brittle, ready to shatter at the slightest provocation. I grabbed my keys, the metal biting into my palm. I just wanted to get to work. I wanted to pretend that the internet did not exist, that Margaret Holloway was a bad dream, and that my life was not unraveling at the seams. I am taking the car, David said, his voice flat. His eyes were tired, rimmed with red. I need to stop by the hardware store before I head to the site. I nodded mutely. We walked down the stairs of our apartment complex together, the distance between us feeling like miles rather than inches. When we pushed open the heavy front door and stepped onto the sidewalk, the world stopped. David stopped so abruptly that I nearly bumped into him. He made a sound, a low, guttural noise of pure shock. My eyes followed his gaze to the curb where his silver sedan was parked. It was no longer silver. A violent splash of red paint covered the windshield and the hood. It dripped down the sides like fresh blood, pooling in the gutter, mixing with the rainwater. The color was shocking against the gray pavement, but it was the words spray-painted in jagged, black letters across the doors that made my knees buckle. Thief, Soyutsing Hulling. 2, adulterer, Soyutsing Hulling. 2 hash is greater than whore. I covered my mouth, a scream dying in my throat before it could escape. The words were large, hateful, and public. They screamed my shame to the entire neighborhood. Oh my God, David whispered. He dropped his coffee cup. It shattered on the concrete, the brown liquid mixing with the red paint. A few neighbors were already outside. Mrs. Gable from the first floor was peering through her curtains. A jogger slowed down, pulling out his phone to take a picture. The humiliation was physical. It felt like I had been stripped naked in the middle of the street. Margaret, it had to be her. Or perhaps it was one of the vigilantes from the online forum. Spurred on by her tears and her lies, David's shock turned instantly to rage. His face flushed a dark, angry red. He marched toward the car, his fists clenched. I am calling the police, he shouted, reaching into his pocket for his phone. This is insanity. This is criminal property damage. I am going to have that woman arrested. Sao Yuting Hao, Ling. Due cancelletto è maggiore di no. The word ripped out of me, desperate and shrill. I ran forward and grabbed David's arm, digging my fingers into his jacket. David, no, you cannot call the police. He spun around, staring at me as if I had lost my mind. Emilia, look at my car. Someone attacked us. They are stalking us. We have to file a report. We cannot, I pleaded, tears streaming down my face. If you call the police, it will become a public record. The press will pick it up. It will be everywhere. Leo's name will be dragged through the mud. Leo's name? David roared. His voice echoed off the brick buildings. I recoiled. David never yelled. You are worried about a dead man's reputation? He asked, his voice shaking with disbelief. What about me? Amelia? What about my car? What about your safety? This is dangerous. Please. David, I begged, shaking my head frantically. Just let it go. I will pay for the paint job. I will buy you a new car if I have to. Just please, do not bring the authorities into this. Margaret, she is just a grieving mother. She did not do this. It was probably just some kids. David looked at me. The anger in his eyes slowly drained away, replaced by something far worse. Pity and resignation. He looked at the red paint dripping onto the asphalt. Then he looked at the ring on my finger, which I was clutching with my other hand as if to protect it from the rain. You are sick, Amelia, he said softly. The words were not an insult. They were a diagnosis. You are sick with guilt, and you are letting it destroy you. I cannot watch this anymore. I cannot be the villain in your tragedy just because I am alive. David, I whispered, reaching for him. He stepped back, out of my reach. I am going to stay at my brother's house, he said. Do not call me. Not until you figure out who you are actually married to, because it is certainly not me. He turned and walked away down the street, leaving the ruined car behind. He did not look back. I stood alone on the sidewalk. The rain began to fall harder, washing the red paint down into the sewer. But the words remained. Thief, adultera. Mrs. Gable was still watching from her window. I could feel her judgment. I could feel the weight of the entire city pressing down on my shoulders. I looked at the ring. It was no longer beautiful. It was a curse. It had cost me my peace, my reputation, and now, the only man who had tried to save me. I could not do this anymore. The fight had left me. Margaret had won. She had taken everything away until I had nothing left but the one thing she wanted. With trembling fingers, I pulled my phone from my pocket. My vision was blurred with tears as I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I had saved from the letterhead. I pressed call. It rang twice before she picked up. Hello? Her voice was calm, serene, as if she were sitting in a garden, unaware of the carnage she had caused. Margaret, I said, my voice breaking. Amelia? Is something wrong? You sound distressed. I closed my eyes, letting the rain soak my face. I surrender. You win. I will bring you the ring. There was a pause on the other end, a satisfied, terrifying silence. Oh, Amelia, she purred. You have made the right choice. Leo will be so pleased. Come to the house tonight. We will settle this once and for all. I ended the call and let my hand drop to my side. I looked at the red paint one last time. It looked like a wound that would never heal. I turned and walked back into the building, leaving the wreckage of my life on the curb. The drive to the Halloway estate felt like a funeral procession of one. The storm that had been threatening all day had finally broken, unleashing a torrent of rain that turned the windshield into a blur of gray and black. My wipers slashed back and forth, fighting a losing battle against the deluge. Every beat of their rhythm seemed to chant a single word: coward, coward, coward. The Halloway mansion sat atop a hill in the Highlands, a neighborhood where the driveways were longer than most city blocks and the gates were always closed. As I pulled up to the wrought iron entrance, the security camera's red eye blinked at me. The gates swung open slowly, groaning against the wind, inviting me into the belly of the beast. The house itself was a monstrosity of Tudor architecture, looming dark and imposing against the stormy sky. Only a few windows were lit, casting long, yellow rectangles onto the wet lawn. It looked less like a home and more like a mausoleum. I parked my car, the engine cutting out with a sputter. For a long moment, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel. My left hand felt heavy. I looked at the diamond one last time. In the dim dashboard light, it did not sparkle. It looked dull, tired, like me. I stepped out into the rain, not bothering with an umbrella. The water soaked through my coat instantly, chilling me to the bone. But I welcomed the cold. It felt like penance. The front door opened before I could knock. A man I did not recognize stood in the doorway. He was tall, gaunt, dressed in a black suit that was slightly too large for him. He had the hollowed-out look of someone who had been around death for too long. "Miss Vance," he said. His voice was dry as dust. "Mrs. Halloway is expecting you." He stepped aside, and I walked into the foyer. The air inside was stiflingly warm and smelled of beeswax and lilies. The scent of a wake. The grand staircase spiraled up into the darkness, and the marble floor beneath my wet boots felt slippery, treacherous. "Please wait in the drawing room," the butler said, gesturing to a set of double doors on the right. "Mrs. Halloway will join you shortly." He disappeared down a hallway, his footsteps making no sound on the thick runners. I was alone. I walked into the drawing room. It was vast and shadowed, filled with furniture that looked too expensive to sit on. A fire crackled in the hearth, but it gave off no warmth, only a flickering, nervous light. I paced, unable to stand still. My anxiety was a physical creature, clawing at my throat. I needed this to be over. I needed to hand over the ring, hear Margaret's false words of forgiveness, and leave. I needed to go find David and beg him to take me back. My pacing took me to the far end of the room, where a heavy velvet curtain was drawn across an alcove. I assumed it was a window, but a sliver of light was escaping from behind the fabric, driven by a curiosity I could not control. I reached out and pulled the curtain aside. It was not a window. It was a glass door leading into a small, attached conservatory or sunroom. My breath hitched. The room was lit by hundreds of candles. They covered every surface, shelves and tables, the floor, and in the center of this flickering shrine was Leo, or rather, hundreds of Leos. Photographs covered the walls. Leo as a baby, Leo graduating, Leo on his sailboat, Leo smiling, Leo serious, Leo laughing. It was obsessive. It was a temple built to worship a dead boy. But as I stepped closer, pushing open the glass door, the air in the room felt wrong. It was heavy, suffocating. I walked toward a large table in the center of the room. It was set up like an altar. In the middle sat a silver urn, polished to a mirror shine. Surrounding it were artifacts of his life. His watch, his favorite sunglasses, a lock of hair tied with a blue ribbon, and there were other things that made my stomach churn. A stack of letters, tied with twine. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was mine. These were the letters I had written to Leo in the months after he died. Letters I had left at his grave. Margaret had taken them. She had stolen my grief, my private words to my dead fiancé, and displayed them here like trophies. Then I saw the photographs on the far wall. They were recent. I stepped closer, squinting in the candlelight. My heart stopped. They were photos of me walking into the archives, me buying groceries, me sitting at a cafe with David, me crying in my car. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Margaret had not just hired someone to vandalize David's car. She had been watching me for weeks, maybe months. She had been stalking me, documenting my betrayal, building a case against me in her twisted court of law. I backed away, my hand covering my mouth to stifle a sob. This was not grief. This was madness. This was a sickness so deep and dark that it had consumed her entirely. I turned to run, to flee this house of horrors, but my foot caught on the leg of the table. I stumbled, and my hand swept across the surface to catch my balance. A pile of papers slid off the table and scattered across the floor. I knelt to pick them up, my hands shaking. I just wanted to put them back and leave. I did not want to touch anything else. But as I gathered the papers, a name caught my eye. A name on a legal document, last will and testament of Leonard Halloway Sr. That was Leo's father. He had died years before Leo. Why was this here? Underneath it was another document, a medical file. Patient, Leo Halloway Jr. Date of birth, November 14th, 2013. Saoyuting Haoling. Zwei Raute ist größer als Eifrose. The date, November 14th, 2013. Leo had died in August of 2013. 3 months before this child was born. My mind raced, trying to do the math, trying to make sense of the impossible. Leo Jr.? Who was Leo Jr.? I flipped the page. There was a photograph attached to the file. A young boy, about 10 years old, with pale skin and dark hair. He looked sick. He looked tired. But he had Leo's eyes. My Leo's eyes. I dropped the file. The papers fanned out around me like dead leaves. Beneath the medical file was a letter from a law firm. The Halloway Trust. Stipulation of legitimacy. I read the words, and the world tilted on its axis. Per the terms of the grandfather's trust, the entirety of the estate shall pass to the firstborn male heir of Leonard Halloway. However, in the event of a child born out of wedlock, a legitimacy must be proven via the possession of the family betrothal token, specifically the platinum and diamond ring purchased on May 12th, 2011. I looked at the ring on my finger, the family betrothal token. Margaret did not care about my soul. She did not care about Leo's ghost screaming in the dark. She did not care about the sanctity of marriage or the purity of mourning. She needed the ring, not to bury it. She needed it to prove that this child, this Leo Jr., was the legal heir to the Halloway fortune, and for there to be a child born 3 months after Leo died. Saoyu Jinghaoling, Jinghao. I felt a scream building in my chest, a primal, agonizing sound that threatened to tear me apart. Leo had not just died. He had left something behind. Someone behind While I was planning our wedding, while I was writing vows and picking out flowers, Leo had been with someone else. He had gotten someone else pregnant. The man I had mourned for 11 years. The man I had placed on a pedestal so high, it touched the heavens. Xiao Yuxing Haoling, Zweiraud is grosser as he was a liar. He was a cheater, and Margaret knew. She had always known. I heard a sound behind me, the click of a door closing. I turned around slowly, still on my knees, amidst the scattered papers. Margaret was standing in the doorway of the conservatory. She was not crying. She looked annoyed, like a teacher who had caught a student cheating on a test. You are always too nosy for your own good. Amelia, she said softly. The thunder outside crashed, shaking the house, but the storm inside me was far more violent. The silence in the conservatory was heavier than the storm raging outside. It pressed against my eardrums. A physical weight composed of 11 years of lies. I slowly stood up, my knees cracking against the hardwood floor. My hands were stained with dust from the scattered papers, but I did not wipe them. I clutched the medical file of the boy, Leo Jr., to my chest as if it were a shield. Margaret did not move from the doorway. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her, her posture impeccable, her expression one of mild irritation, as if I had spilled wine on a rug rather than uncovered the destruction of my entire life. Who is he? I asked. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. It was not the voice of the grieving fiancé. It was the voice of a stranger who had just woken up from a decade-long coma. Margaret Sihil. A sharp exhalation through her nose. She walked into the room, her heels clicking on the floorboards, bypassing me to adjust a candle that was flickering near a photo of Leo. He is my grandson, she said simply, not looking at me. He is the last of the Holloway line, and he is dying. I looked down at the file in my hands. Leukemia. The boy was 10 years old. He was sick. He was innocent, but his existence was a knife in my heart. He was born 3 months after Leo died. I whispered, doing the math again, desperate for it to be wrong. That means Xiao Yuxing Haoling, R. Jingho Dayu. It means Leo was not the saint you constructed in your head. Amelia. Margaret cut in. She turned to face me, her gray eyes cold and hard. He was a man with needs, a man with passions, and frankly, a man who was bored. The word hit me like a physical slap. Bored. I stepped back, gripping the edge of the table for support. We were happy. We were planning a wedding. We bought a house. You bought a house, Margaret corrected. Leo just went along with it because it was easier than fighting you. You were always so eager, Amelia, so desperate to please. It was suffocating him. She walked closer, her gaze drifting to the ring on my finger. Sarah was different, she continued, her voice taking on a cruel, nostalgic tone. Sarah was his first love. They met in college. She was wild, artistic, everything you are not. They reconnected about 6 months before the accident. He did not want to hurt you. Of course, Leo was too soft for that, so he dragged it out. He lived a double life. I felt bile rise in my throat. Every memory I had of those last 6 months. Leo working late. Leo going on weekend business trips. Leo being distant suddenly shifted into focus. I had thought he was stressed about the wedding expenses. I had comforted him. I had made him soup and rubbed his shoulders, telling him we would get through it together. And all the while, he had been with her. He was going to leave you, Margaret said, She delivered the news with the casual indifference of a weather report. On the day of the accident, that is where he was going. Amelia, he was not driving to the florist. He was driving to Sarah. He was going to propose to her. No, I gasped. That is a lie. He was wearing the watch I gave him. He called me that morning and told me he loved me. He called you to say goodbye. You foolish girl. Margaret snapped, her patience finally fraying. He needed the ring. He took it from the safe that morning. Did he not? Or he tried to, but you were wearing it. You never took the damn thing off. He could not ask for it back without starting a fight he did not have the courage to finish over breakfast. My mind reeled back to that morning. Leo had been frantic. He had asked me why I was wearing the ring to the gym. I had laughed and told him I never wanted to be without it. He had looked at me with a strange expression. Not love, but frustration, pity. He died trying to get to his real family. Margaret said, gesturing to the photos of the boy. And you? You have spent 11 years playing the grieving widow for a man who was hours away from erasing you from his life. I sank into a chair, my legs no longer able to hold me. The room spun, the shrine, the candles, the photos. It was all a grotesque mockery. So all of this, I waved my hand at the room. The dreams, the haunting, the story about his soul not being at rest. Lies, Margaret admitted, without a shred of shame. Well, mostly, I do believe he is not at rest. How could he be? His son is dying, and his fortune is locked away because of a technicality. She reached out and tapped the legal document on the table with a manicured fingernail. The Holloway Trust is ironclad, she explained. My late husband was a traditionalist. He despised children born out of wedlock. The only way for an illegitimate child to inherit, to access the funds needed for the bone marrow treatments and the specialists in Switzerland, is if the mother can prove she was the intended spouse. The clause requires the possession of the family betrothal token. I stared at her, understanding finally dawning on me in a horrifying wave. The ring, I whispered. Yes, the ring, Margaret hissed. The ring has a serial number engraved inside the band. It matches the purchase records in the trust documents. Whoever holds that ring is, in the eyes of the family lawyers, the true fiancé. She leaned over me, her perfume overpowering the smell of the rain. I need that ring. Amelia, I need to give it to Sarah. I need her to walk into that lawyer's office and claim what belongs to her son. Without it, the trust remains frozen. Without the money, Leo Jr. dies. I looked at her, seeing her clearly for the first time. She was not just a grieving mother. She was a monster. She had watched me mourn for a decade. She had watched me cry at the funeral, holding my hand while I shook. She had watched me refuse to date, refuse to move on, trapping myself in a mausoleum of her son's memory. And she had said nothing. You knew, I said, my voice trembling with rage. You knew the whole time. You let me waste my life. You let me believe he was perfect. Why would I tell you? Margaret asked, straightening up and smoothing her skirt. You were a useful shield. As long as you were the public face of the grieving widow, no one looked too closely at Sarah. No one asked questions about the boy. We protected his reputation. His reputation? I screamed. Standing up so abruptly, the chair fell backward with a crash. You destroyed my life to protect a cheater's reputation, and now I am asking you to save his son, Margaret shouted back, her voice echoing off the glass walls. Look at the boy. Amelia, look at him. She shoved the photo of the sick child into my face. He is innocent. He has done nothing to you. He is fighting for his life in a hospital bed right now. And you are standing there, clutching a piece of jewelry like a greedy little dragon. It is not about the jewelry, I yelled, tears streaming down my face. It is about the truth. You want me to give you the ring so you can hand it to the woman he cheated on me with. You want me to help you rewrite history so that I never existed? You never did exist to him. Margaret spat the words out. You were a placeholder, a safe option, a mistake, and now you have the chance to be useful for once in your miserable life. Give me the ring. Let me save my grandson. Or do you want his death on your conscience too? She was cornering me. She was using my empathy, my guilt, my very nature against me. She knew I was a person who fixed things. She knew I was a person who could not bear to see something broken. I looked at the ring. The diamond caught the candlelight, fracturing it into 1,000 sharp shards. If I give you this, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, I am admitting that my love meant nothing. I am admitting that I was the other woman in my own engagement. You are admitting the truth, Margaret said, her voice softening, sensing victory. And is not the truth supposed to set you free? She held out her hand, palm up, expectant, entitled, just give it to me. Amelia, go back to your little apartment. Go back to that man you are living with. David, is it not? He seems nice, simple, like you. Let the Halloways deal with Halloway matters. I looked at her hand. It was steady. It was the hand of a woman who had never been told no in her entire life. I reached for the ring. I felt the cool metal slide over my knuckle. It was loose. My fingers had grown thinner over the last few weeks from the stress she had caused me. I pulled it off. For the first time in 11 years, my hand was bare. The skin underneath was pale, indented, scarred by the ghost of the metal. Margaret's eyes lit up. A look of avarice and triumph crossed her face. Good girl, she purred. I held the ring between my thumb and forefinger. It was so small, so insignificant, yet it held the power to save a life and destroy a memory. I thought about David. I thought about the red paint on his car. I thought about the way he had looked at me last night. With pity, he had known. Deep down, he had known that I was worshipping a false idol. I thought about the boy, Leo Jr. He had Leo's eyes. He did not deserve to die because his father was a liar and his grandmother was a sociopath. But I also thought about myself. I thought about the 25-year-old girl who had stood in that antique shop, smiling until her cheeks hurt, believing she was the luckiest woman in the world. I thought about the woman who had spent her 30s visiting a grave in the rain, talking to a headstone, promising eternal loyalty to a man who had died on his way to betray her. Margaret reached for the ring. I pulled my hand back. Margaret's smile faltered. Amelia, you want the ring? I said, my voice steadying. You want the betrothal token? Yes, she said, impatience creeping back in. Give it to me. I looked around the room. I saw a heavy bronze letter opener on the desk, another artifact of Leo's life. I walked over and picked it up. What are you doing? Margaret asked, her voice rising in pitch. The legal document, I said, staring at the paper on the floor. It says you need the ring purchased on May 12th, 2011. It needs the serial number inside the band. Yes, exactly. So stop playing games and hand it over. I looked at the diamond. It was a vintage cut, flawless. Leo had told me it represented the clarity of our love. I paid for this diamond. I said, I cashed out my savings bonds from my grandmother. I put $3,000 into this stone. Leo paid for the setting. I do not care about the money. I will write you a check, Margaret screamed. I will pay you double, triple. Just give me the ring. I ignored her. I placed the ring on the edge of the heavy oak desk. I held the bronze letter opener like a chisel. I am not a placeholder. Margaret, I said, looking her dead in the eye, and I am not a villain. I am the woman who kept his memory alive while you were plotting. Amelia. No. Margaret lunged forward, but I was faster. I was an archival restoration specialist. I knew how things were put together, and I knew exactly how to take them apart. I brought the heavy handle of the letter opener down on the ring. The gold was soft, but the setting was delicate. I did not smash it. I was not destructive. I was precise. I used the tip of the tool to pry the prongs back. 1, 2, 3, 4. Margaret was clawing at my arm, screaming, "You are crazy. You are insane." I shoved her back with a strength I did not know I possessed. The diamond popped out of the setting and rolled onto the desk. A small, glittering stone. Just carbon. Just a rock. I picked up the empty setting, the platinum band, the betrothal token. It was bent slightly, warped, looking like a mouth screaming in silence. But the inscription inside was intact. The serial number was there. I held the empty frame out to Margaret. "Here," I said. She stared at the empty ring, horrified. "What have you done? I gave you what you asked for," I said, my voice cold as the ice that had killed Leo. "You need the ring to prove the engagement? There is the ring. The serial number is there. The date is there. The legal requirement is met." I picked up the loose diamond and closed my fist around it. "But the jewel, the beauty, the value," I said, "that belongs to me. That was my investment. That was my grandmother's legacy. Sarah can have the empty medal. She can have the hollow promise, because that is what Leo gave her. Is it not? A hollow promise." Margaret looked from the twisted band in her hand to my face. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She looked at the ring as if it were a dead insect. "It is ruined." She whispered, "No," I said, walking toward the door. "It is accurate. It is exactly what your son was. Empty." I stopped at the threshold of the conservatory. The candlelight flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls of the shrine. "You can tell the lawyers that the stone was lost," I said without looking back. "Or you can tell them the truth. I do not care. The boy gets his money. You get your lineage, and I get my life back." I walked out of the drawing room, leaving Margaret Holloway standing in the center of her temple of lies, clutching a piece of bent metal, surrounded by 1,000 pictures of a man who never really existed. The heavy oak door of the Holloway mansion clicked shut behind me, severing the connection between the suffocating air of the mausoleum and the wet, cold reality of the night. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy and expectant, like the world holding its breath after a scream. I walked down the stone steps, my legs moving on autopilot. My right hand was clenched tight inside my coat pocket. The diamond was there, the loose stone dug into my palm, its sharp edges biting into my skin. It was a physical reminder of the violence I had just committed. I had desecrated a sacred object. I had vandalized a symbol of eternal love. But as I reached my car, leaning against the cold metal of the door, a hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat. It was not love. It was never love. It was a receipt. I had just returned a receipt for a transaction that had been canceled 11 years ago. I got into the car and turned the key. The engine roared to life. sounding too loud in the quiet neighborhood. As I drove down the winding roads of the Highlands, leaving the gated community of old money and buried secrets behind, the adrenaline began to fade. In its place came the crash, a crushing, suffocating weight of exhaustion. My phone, mounted on the dashboard, lit up with a notification. Queen Anne Community Connect. New comment on heartless woman refuses mother's plea. I should have ignored it. I should have thrown the phone out the window. But the masochistic urge to see the extent of the damage was too strong. I pulled over to the shoulder of the road, the tires crunching on wet gravel, and unlocked the screen. The thread had exploded. User Justice for Leo. I heard she finally went to the house tonight, probably to ask for more money. Some people have no shame. User Sarah J 88. I saw her car parked there. It is a beat-up sedan. Clearly, she needs the cash. The Halloways should just sue her and be done with it. User Neighbor Jim. I walked past her building. The boyfriend's car is gone. Even he could not stomach her anymore. Good for him. I read the words, feeling a strange detachment. These people, strangers who had never met me, never seen me restore a photograph with microscopic precision, never watched me cry myself to sleep for a decade. They had constructed an entire effigy of me. To them, I was a gold digger. I was a heartless ex. I was a villain, and the terrifying truth was, I could never correct them. I looked out the window at the city lights twinkling below. If I told the truth, if I posted the medical records, if I screamed from the rooftops that Leo Halloway was a cheater and a liar, I would be destroying an innocent boy. Leo Jr., the sick child with the haunted eyes. If I exposed the timeline, I would be branding him a bastard in the eyes of the very trust fund that was supposed to save his life. Margaret knew that. She knew I was trapped by my own morality. She knew I would take the fall because I was not like them. I put the car in gear and drove the rest of the way home in a blur. When I turned onto my street, the first thing I saw was the empty spot at the curb. David's car was still gone. The red paint on the asphalt had been diluted by the rain, spreading into a pinkish stain that looked like watered-down blood. Saoiting Haoling, 2 hashes greater than thief. The word was still faintly visible on the pavement where the spray paint had missed the car. I parked and stepped out. The streetlights buzzed overhead. I felt exposed. I felt like there were eyes behind every curtain. Was Mrs. Gable watching? Was the jogger who took the photo earlier posting an update right now? Citing, "The witch returns." I walked to the front door of my building. Keeping my head down, I felt dirty. The shame Margaret had manufactured clung to me like a second skin. Even though I knew the truth now, even though I knew I was the one who had been wronged, the public narrative was powerful. It stripped me of my dignity. It made me question my own reflection. I unlocked my apartment door and stepped inside. The silence that greeted me was different from the silence in the mansion. This was the silence of abandonment. The apartment smelled of stale coffee and David's aftershave, a ghost of the life I had been living just 24 hours ago. I walked into the living room and turned on a single lamp. The light fell on the framed photograph of Leo on the mantelpiece. It was my favorite photo of him. He was looking away from the camera, laughing, the wind catching his hair. For 11 years, I had looked at that photo every single day. I had kissed my fingers and touched the frame before leaving for work. I had whispered goodnight to it. I had built my entire identity around being the woman who was loved by that man. Now, looking at it, I saw something else. I saw the way his eyes were looking away, not at the scenery, but perhaps at someone else. I saw the tightness in his smile, I saw the stranger. I walked over to the mantelpiece. My hands were steady now. The numbness had taken over completely. I picked up the frame. All the sympathy from my friends over the years. All the pity from my family. All the whispered, "Poor Amelia. She is so tragic, so romantic." It was all based on a lie. I was not the tragic heroine of a great romance. I was the punchline of a cruel joke. I was the woman who kept the seat warm while the real wife waited in the wings. The public shame outside, the internet comments, the red paint, the whispers. That was painful. But this private shame? This realization that I had wasted my youth mourning a man who was probably relieved to be rid of me? This was a demolition of the soul. I took the photograph out of the frame. The paper felt fragile. I did not tear it. I did not burn it. That would be too dramatic. That would imply passion. And I had no passion left for Leo Holloway. I simply folded it in half, then in half again, and again, until it was just a small, thick square of paper. I walked to the kitchen trash can and dropped it in. It landed on top of the coffee grounds from yesterday morning. Saodzing Hao Ling. 2 hash is greater than trash. I went to the sink and turned on the tap. I washed my hands, scrubbing them with dish soap until the skin was raw and red. I wanted to wash off the touch of the Holloway house. I wanted to wash off the feeling of the ring. I looked at my left hand under the running water. The indentation was still there, the pale band of skin where the sun had not touched in a decade. It looked like a scar. Margaret had her ring. The boy had his money. The internet had its villain. Saodzing Hao Ling. 2 hash is greater than, and I turned off the water and dried my hands on a kitchen towel. The apartment was empty. My phone was silent. My reputation was in tatters. I had absolutely nothing. And for the first time in 11 years, as I stood in the center of my ruined life, I took a breath that did not catch on the jagged edges of my grief. The next morning, I woke up to a sensation I had not felt in over a decade. It was the feeling of air on my skin. For 11 years, I had hidden myself behind layers of wool and cotton, burying my body in shapeless sweaters and modest coats, as if my femininity were a sin against Leo's memory. I had dressed like a nun in the Church of the Dead, but the church had burned down last night. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in the hallway. The woman staring back at me looked like a ghost. Her hair was limp and dark, hanging heavily around a pale, tired face. Her clothes were drab. She looked like a victim. I hated her. I stripped off my oversized pajamas and let them fall to the floor. I looked at my body. It was not the body of a withered widow. I had curves that I had been ashamed of, hips that I had concealed, a softness that I had denied. I was 36 years old, and I was alive. I grabbed my purse. I did not go to work. I did not call David. I had one final exorcism to perform. 2 hours later, I sat in a leather chair at a salon in downtown Seattle, watching dark locks of hair fall to the tiled floor. Cut it all off. I had told the stylist. Now, I looked at my reflection. The heavy, dark curtain was gone. My hair was now a shoulder-length lob, textured and sharp, dyed a warm, vibrant honey blonde that caught the light. It framed my face, highlighting cheekbones I had forgotten I possessed. I looked younger. I looked dangerous. I walked out of the salon and straight into a high-end boutique 3 doors down. I walked past the racks of sensible black trousers and gray blazers. My hand brushed against silk, cashmere, and linen. I stopped in front of a dress on a mannequin. It was ivory, the color of new beginnings, not the white of a wedding or the black of a funeral. It was a fitted, sleeveless sheath dress made of heavy silk that draped like water. I took it into the fitting room. When I zipped it up, the transformation was absolute. The fabric hugged my waist and flowed over my hips, accentuating an hourglass silhouette that was both voluptuous and elegant. The neckline plunged just enough to be alluring without revealing too much, exposing the delicate line of my collarbones. The slit in the skirt showed a glimpse of my leg when I moved. I looked in the mirror. The tragic Amelia Vance was gone. The woman staring back was radiant, imposing, and undeniably sexy. I applied a coat of crimson lipstick, the color of fresh blood, stark against the ivory dress. I bought the dress. I wore it out of the store, leaving my old clothes in a pile in the dressing room. I told the sales clerk to burn them. I walked down the street, my heels clicking a sharp rhythm on the pavement. People turned to look. Men stopped mid-sentence to stare. Women glanced with envy. For the first time, the stares were not because of pity or rumors. They were staring because I was stunning. I held my head high, my shoulders back, projecting a confidence that was brittle but blinding. I drove to the archives. I needed to clear out my desk. I could not work there anymore. I could not be the keeper of the past when I was so desperate to escape it. When I pushed open the doors, the office went silent. Linda dropped a file folder. Mr. Henderson stopped midway through a sip of coffee. They gaped at me. They were expecting the weeping, a broken woman who had run out into the rain yesterday. Instead, they got a vision in ivory silk and honey blonde hair, a woman who looked like she had just stepped off a runway in Milan. I walked to my desk, ignoring their open mouths. I grabbed a cardboard box and began to pack. My movements were efficient. Cold. Amelia? Linda whispered, walking over cautiously. Is that you? I did not look up. I placed my stapler in the box. You saw the post, did you not? Linda asked, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. About the ring? Everyone is talking about it. I stopped. I turned to look at her. I flashed a smile that did not reach my eyes. It was a shark's smile. Let them talk. Linda, I said, my voice smooth and low. It gives them something to do with their boring lives. I picked up the box. I looked at my left hand. The indentation was still there on my finger, but I had painted my nails the same deep red as my lips. It looked less like a scar and more like a battle wound I had survived. I walked toward the exit. Mr. Henderson stepped forward, looking flustered. Miss Vance, if you are leaving, we need to discuss your notice period. I am not giving notice, I said, not breaking my stride. I am giving you a vacancy. I walked out into the sunlight. The air smelled of rain and exhaust, but to me, it smelled like freedom. I felt a phantom pain in my chest, a hollow space where my heart used to be, but at least the weight was gone. I was empty, yes, but I was beautiful, and I was free. And for now, that would have to be enough. I pulled my phone out. I stared at David's number. My thumb hovered over the screen. I was not the woman he had left 2 days ago. I was not the woman who worshipped a ghost. I was someone new. I just hoped he would recognize me. I found David parked on a quiet side street near his brother's house in Ballard. He was on his knees on the wet pavement, a bucket of soapy water beside him, scrubbing furiously at the door of his sedan. The red spray paint had faded to a stubborn pink smear, but the words were still visible if you looked closely enough. 邵玉静好, Ling. Tuhash is greater than thief. He looked exhausted. His shoulders were slumped, his flannel shirt stained with sweat and solvent. He was cleaning up my mess. He had been cleaning up my messes for 2 years, living in the shadow of a mausoleum I had built, loving a woman who was only half there. I stood on the sidewalk, the heels of my new shoes clicking softly on the concrete. The ivory silk of my dress fluttered in the breeze, a stark contrast to the grit and grime of the street. I felt like a creature from another species, shed of its old, dull skin. David stopped scrubbing. He sensed someone standing there. He wiped his forehead with the back of his hand and looked up, squinting against the glare of the afternoon sun. His eyes widened. He blinked, as if he were not sure he was seeing correctly. He looked at the blonde hair, the fitted dress, the red lipstick. He looked for the mousy, gray woman he had left 3 days ago, but she was nowhere to be found. "Amy?" he asked, his voice rough. I stepped closer, ignoring the puddle of dirty water near my expensive shoes. "I am sorry about the car," I said. My voice was steady, devoid of the trembling fragility that had defined me for so long. David stood up slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. He did not smile. He looked wary, like a man approaching a bomb that might still go off. "It is just paint," he said, his eyes scanning my face, searching for clues. "You look different." "I am different," I replied. I looked down at my left hand. I held it up so he could see. The finger was bare. The pale indentation was still there, a white ghost against my skin. But the metal was gone. I gave it back, I said. David let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for days. "You gave her the ring?" "I gave her the frame." I corrected him. "I kept the diamond. I destroyed the setting. It is over. David, the debt is paid. The ghost is gone." He looked at my hand, then back at my eyes. There was no triumph in his face, only a quiet, painful relief. "And what about Leo?" he asked, the name that had always hung between us like a curtain. I took a step closer to him. The smell of harsh chemicals and rain surrounded us. "Leo is dead," I said, "and the man I thought he was never existed." I was mourning a reflection. David. I was in love with a tragedy because it made me feel special. It made me feel like a survivor. But I was not a survivor. I was just a volunteer victim. I paused, forcing myself to say the hardest part, the part that admitted my own sin. "I used you, David. I used your patience and your love as a bandage, but I never let the wound heal. I was selfish. I was so busy polishing my own halo of grief that I did not care if I was suffocating you." David dropped the rag into the bucket. The water splashed, dark and murky. He did not say it was okay. He did not brush it off. He respected me enough to let the apology stand in the air, heavy and real. "So, who is this?" he asked, gesturing to my dress, my hair, the new sharpness in my eyes. "This is Amelia," I said. "Just Amelia. No last name attached to a dead man. No history attached to a ring. I am starting over. I am empty. David, I have nothing left of the last 11 years. I looked him in the eye, stripping away the last of my defenses. I do not know if you want to fill that empty space. I do not know if I deserve another chance, but I am asking for a ride home. Not to the museum, not to the shrine, just home." David looked at me for a long, agonizing minute. He looked at the woman in the ivory dress who was standing in the gutter, waiting for his judgment. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his keys. He did not hug me. He did not kiss me. We were past the point of easy fixes. There was work to do. There was trust to rebuild. He unlocked the car. The lock clicked with a sound that felt like a gavel coming down. "Get in," he said softly. "Let us go home." I walked around to the passenger side. As I reached for the handle, I caught my reflection in the window. I saw the scar on my finger. It would fade. Eventually, but for now, it was a reminder that I had survived the crash. And this time, I had finally walked away from the wreckage. We spend our lives collecting things. We collect moments. We collect people. And sometimes, we collect pain. We polish our trauma like it is a precious stone, displaying it for the world to see, convinced that our suffering makes us deep, makes us worthy, makes us noble. I wore a ring for 4,018 days. I thought it was a symbol of eternal love. In reality, it was a tombstone I carried on my own hand. It was a barrier that kept the warmth of the living world at bay. Margaret Holloway got what she wanted. Her grandson received his inheritance. The Holloway name continues. She sits in her mansion on the hill, surrounded by portraits of a son she never really knew, clutching a bent piece of platinum that holds a lie together. She has her legacy. I have my scar. I look at my hand now as I type this. The white mark on my ring finger is fading, blending back into the skin, but it will never completely disappear, and I am glad. It reminds me that dignity is not about holding on. Dignity is about knowing when to let go. It is about realizing that you cannot be the protagonist of your own life if you are busy being the extra in a dead man's story. We are all haunted, not by ghosts, but by the versions of ourselves we refuse to bury. So I ask you, as the rain falls on the city outside, and I sit in a room that is finally, truly quiet, what are you holding on to that is already gone?